Well, thank you, and thank you all for being with us. I know we'll have a few additional folks joining as we go on, but I think in the interest of time, let's get started. I want to thank you all again for your leadership in the Holiday Challenge leading up to Giving Tuesday. The Holiday Challenge, as I think you all know, is CureJM's year-end fundraising campaign. It is our second largest, if you will, fundraising effort now behind the walks, all the walks collaboratively or collectively, I should say, and is critically important to the success of the Giving Tuesday campaign, and the Holiday Challenge is critically important to our ability to continue to expand our research funding and clinical funding around the country. Our goal this year, as Shannon may have shared with many of you, is $300,000 and a stretch goal of $400,000. We are very fortunate in as much as once again we have a matching prize campaign, if you will, from the Leitz family of $150,000. That we will be utilizing really across the board as incentives, much in the same way that we used to be able to utilize the incentives from CrowdRise. We will be using the CrowdRise campaign, but unfortunately they have discontinued the actual prizes and competition. So we're sort of having to go it alone for the first time this year, but nevertheless anticipate that we'll have great success. But we have brought down our goals a little bit compared to what we've achieved in some past years because of that. That said, we anticipate having as many families as ever participate in this campaign. Very much due in part to your leadership and to Shannon's great leadership, and are looking forward to a very successful campaign. Why this is so important to us, this $300,000 to $400,000, is it is part of a larger budget of about $2.2 million a year that CureJM has, in our operating budget, most of which goes to our research budget and to program. Currently, we have $5 million of research funding at work. That means if you take all of our active research grants, that are several of which are multi-year grants that run 2, 3, and 4 years, for example. Those grants total $5 million, and the payments that we will be making on those grants between the September of this year. In fact, I just approved about $425,000 in payments, and September of 2020 was about $2 million. So another way to kind of look at this is, as we look at our overall fundraising success around the country, it's kind of $2 million in and $2 million out for our grants. And I think that's something that very few charitable organizations and research organizations can point to in terms of their efficiency. You out across the country and in our chapters, working on the challenge, working on a lot of other events, wraparound events for walks. I can't thank you enough for what you're doing, because you really are driving our success at the grassroots level, as you always have, and it enables CureJM to work with, I think, efficiently with a relatively small staff, and a staff that we don't anticipate increasing in size, anytime in the foreseeable future. We're very focused. The board is very focused on maintaining our efficiencies. For those of you who are fairly new or who haven't had the opportunity to interact with many of our doctors, I just also want to mention that, due to the wisdom of our board many years ago in creating a medical advisory board, we have now 7 of the foremost, and I say now, I really mean for some time, have had seven of the foremost juvenile myositis experts in the world who are advising our grant program and really, I think, creating much better solutions. They've made sense of over the years of treatment protocols, and these individuals and the individuals they consult with, the doctors that they consult with around the country and around the world have saved many lives as a result of the organization of CureJM some 15 years ago. Our goal, as it has always been, is to not only fund the best world-class researchers, but also to support strong and really always improving clinical care at children's hospitals around the country. I think you're aware that currently we have 4 centers of excellence. Just a few years ago, we had 2 centers of excellence, one in Washington, D.C., one in Chicago. We now have additional centers of excellence in Seattle and Duke University. But we're not stopping there. One of the, I think, real important focus, new focus components for CureJM is to really look at how we can better invest in children's hospitals, and particularly children's hospitals that have strong pediatric rheumatology programs and some, if not significant, JM expertise on their staff around the country to better serve our parents, who of course live in all 50 states around the country. So I think, looking forward, we have a real strong obligation and focus to expand that level of support that we can give to clinical care in children's pediatric hospitals in states where we currently have either small levels of support or no levels of support at all. So this would include states like Texas or Southern California or Arizona or Florida, for example, all states where we have very active parents, but our interaction with some of the pediatric rheumatology departments, while we know these people and interact with them somewhat, I wouldn't say that they are insiders in the CureJM world. And one of our next steps is really to help make those individuals and those docs insiders, so we can improve the quality of care or have some influence in improving the quality of care in more places around the country. Essentially, this is kind of like creating a bigger tent, if you will, for clinical care. Couple of things I want to mention that I think are very much milestones for CureJM is it is really kind of amazing to me that there are now 5 clinical trials that are taking place or have taken place for drugs to be used in juvenile myositis. These are all drugs. These clinical trials at this moment are all drugs that would be used off-label for juvenile myositis, but which are targeting juvenile myositis specifically in the clinical trial design. I think the one that maybe you've all heard about is a drug called vamorolone, which is I call it a non-steroid steroid. It is a potential replacement for prednisone, which is, of course, the standard of care for JM children, as you all know. Vamorolone is now in phase 3 clinical trials for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It has been tested in some 80 Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients and has shown not only great safety but also efficacy. Where in fact it is shown to be so effective that I think all but 2 patients who still require DMD patients who still require steroid treatment have elected to stay on vamorolone instead of returning to prednisone at the conclusion of the trial. The phase 3 trial is about half enrolled. the bottom line in all of this is that they anticipate that the trial will be sufficiently completed by the fall of 2020, roughly a year from now, to be able to submit a new drug application to the FDA, and it may be as early as the first quarter of 2021 that we could have an FDA approval for vamorolone. Concurrent with that trial is our plan and our hope is to have a small JDM trial for vamorolone that could be up and running as soon as 12 months from now. We have just completed a plan in collaboration with the ReveraGen, which is the company that developed vamorolone. And ReveraGen is taking that plan for a JDM trial to the FDA for FDA comment in what's called a pre-IND meeting or a pre-new drug application meeting. The FDA will provide some feedback to us on that plan. The plan will be revised based upon that feedback. And it will go back to the FDA then for approval of a clinical trial plan, at which time we can begin enrollment. The plan calls for about 24 patients to be enrolled. Ages would roughly be 8 to 18 years of age. There'll be a dosing study, 2 different doses in the plan, which will look not only at safety but also efficacy. The goal of our trial is to produce a paper, a research paper that will certainly show that the drug is safe in children. We believe that to be the case because of the animal studies and the safety studies that have already been done in DMD. And that will also show some signs of efficacy, which is a little more difficult to predict. Just because it's efficacious in DMD does not mean that it will necessarily be efficacious in juvenile myositis. However, because the chemical composition of vamorolone is so close, it's not identical, but with the exception of a few changes in the chemical composition, it really is not much different than prednisone, and so there is reason to believe that we will see efficacy in JDM kids, but it's really too early to say that with any high degree of confidence. Nevertheless, we'll be moving forward with this. If we can get that clinical trial completed in optimistically 18 months, realistically 2 years, and get that paper published, then at that point it would be possible for vamorolone to be utilized by JM docs in replacement of prednisone regimen. So we're very optimistic about this, and the important thing that you really need to know about vamorolone, should it prove to be efficacious, is that it has no side effects. Virtually all of the side effects that are associated with prednisone are eliminated in vamorolone, and so should this prove to be efficacious in juvenile myositis, it will truly be a significant breakthrough for our kids. There are several other drug clinical trials that are underway that have enrolled JM patients. There's a trial for a drug called lenabosum. It's being done by a small pharmaceutical company called Corbus in Massachusetts. It has shown some great promise in a phase 1, phase 2 safety trial, particularly for skin indications, but they've also seen that it has beneficial impact on muscle strength in these first trials. They are currently enrolling a phase 3 trial, which includes juvenile myositis patients who are adults. So patients who are 18 years of age or older with juvenile myositis will be enrolled in this trial. Again, the early indications from the phase 1 and phase 2 trial in adult myositis are very promising, and one of the things that we will know from this phase 3 trial, which includes probably something like 10 to 15 juvenile myositis patients, is whether it is also efficacious in juvenile myositis. Again, once this drug is approved for, and assuming it's approved, the trial is successful and it's approved for use in adult myositis, based upon the 12 to 18 patients with juvenile myositis who will be enrolled in the trial, the publication and the evidence presented to the FDA should be sufficient to allow clinicians to prescribe this drug in juvenile myositis and to test its efficacy individually with patients. Several other drugs that are being tested in myositis right now are a class of drugs that are known as JAK inhibitors. These are drugs that are primarily used for other autoimmune diseases or for rheumatoid arthritis. But there was a clinical trial for juvenile myositis patients for a called faricimab that has a trade name of Olumiant that took place in adults at Johns Hopkins University, and a trial in juveniles for juvenile myositis that took place at NIH. The results for the adults are public and published, and again, extremely positive and promising in terms of the dramatic improvement that have been seen in skin conditions, reduction of calcinosis and skin scores as a result of this, and some muscle strength as well, although muscle strength was not a target of this particular trial. The NIH trial in juvenile myositis results have not been published, so I can't really say much about what the outcome of that trial is, other than to say that sort of the inside, scoop, if you will, is that the results look pretty promising. And so that was a trial that was conducted in 12 juvenile myositis patients, I think, again, roughly 8 to 18 years of age. It was conducted by Hannah Kim, who some of you may know as a frequent presenter at our JM conferences. And that paper should be published and out sometime in the next 3 to 6 months, at which time we'll have better data to be able to share with all of you. And then finally, we've funded a project that has looked at which children will respond to the drug rituximab and which children will not respond to the drug rituximab. This is essentially based upon the autoantibody profile that we have for children who have gone through autoantibody testing. So the outcome of this particular project, which was done at Duke University, was to present the evidence to physicians that if your patient has this particular autoantibody profile, and it could be any number of autoantibodies, that they are far more likely to respond positively to rituximab as a part of their treatment regimen than if they have this other autoantibody profile where there is very little or no efficacy for rituximab. The importance of this is it will help us help physicians be able to make better judgments and fewer guesses about what drugs children will respond to. Simply by having children go through, and I shouldn't say it's a simple process, but go through autoantibody testing so we can better understand what their profile is. These are all parts of steps that will allow us to gather more data that ultimately will lead to more precision medicine or personalized medicine every child being different, every child responding to treatment regimens somewhat differently, the more data that we have that we can utilize to better specify what we believe or what docs believe treatments are going to work, the more efficacious those treatments will be. And then I also want to mention, for many of you, I've talked before about the library of drugs at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences at NIH. This is a project we started 3 years ago through funding from Marge Coffey. Once again, thank you, Marge, for that. And they have really made some extraordinary progress. We have narrowed down some 3,000 approved compounds and another, I think, 35 or 4,000 unapproved, meaning these are drugs that have been developed by the pharmaceutical industry, but they never went forward with the FDA to have them approved. And we've narrowed down to 180 drugs or compounds that show initial efficacy in what is basically chemical robotic screening for juvenile myositis. So what we've done is we've created a measurement assay. We test this using this assay. We test these drugs against juvenile myositis cells. These are, essentially blood samples that have been created that have juvenile myositis antibodies in them, and we can see to what extent these drugs impact juvenile myositis through this robotic screening. This is a way that we can test 6,000 drugs in the course of a year before these had to be tested one by one in a laboratory. The next step in this is to take these 180 drugs down to about 15. Our best estimate at this point is that 15 of these 15 drugs, as many as 10, maybe 2/3, will be drugs that are already on the market and available for off-label use. And 5 will be drugs that were never brought to the market, but are included for further testing because they're showing an extraordinary level of efficacy in JM that may in fact be even higher than the efficacy that's being shown in the approved drugs. Why is this important? Is because of those unapproved drugs, if we found one that was simply a home run, we may well want to spend the money to go through the clinical trials to have that particular drug approved if it is far superior to the drugs that are already approved for other indications. We don't know the answer to that, but if in fact a year from now we find ourselves with 10 approved compounds that look to have great promise and 5 unapproved compounds that have even greater promise, will really be somewhere that just a few years ago we could have only dreamed about. The last thing that we're doing, or I shouldn't say the last thing, but the final and new piece that we're doing at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, again, all of this robotic screening, is we're screening a national toxins laboratory. There are about 2,500 known toxins that are cataloged, if you will, and stored by the NIH. And so we'll be able to see, again, through this robotic process, which one of these toxins or which ones of these toxins appear to have a deleterious or a negative effect on the JM samples that we're testing. This is important because if we can identify some small number of toxins, these would be things such as, chemicals in the water, chemicals in our air, things that we breathe. They include viruses, for example. So all kinds of bad things that can happen to the human system, as a result of the toxins that are around us, the things we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe. We can test those now in this JM assay that we've created to see what kind of impact they have on JM cells. What we might learn from this could be huge, in as much as we can begin the process, and it's early, but we can begin the process, of proving, for example, that petrochemical compounds that are in the water. I'm going to pick on a city like Houston, for example, because it's a big petrochemical area. That those compounds are shown to trigger juvenile myositis, shown to trigger an autoimmune response. We've long suspected this, of course. We've never been able to prove this. This may be a first step in us looking at those sort of triggers, if you will, of juvenile myositis, and more importantly, those toxins which could be triggers of flaring once we know that a child has juvenile myositis. So a lot of great things happening as a result of our ongoing partnership with NIH, all again made possible by the fundraising all of you are doing for us. Finally, I want to just mention a 2-year study that we're halfway through now that we funded, which is to determine whether exercise and supplements of creatine and the coenzyme CoQ10 can build and maintain muscle strength and endurance in JM kids. This is being done by Brian Feldman at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. Many of you have seen Brian at our prior conferences. He's also a member of our medical advisory board. And the results of this study, I don't have the results of the study, so I can't share anything with you, but they should be done within 12 to 18 months. He's in the second year of the study. I think he's looking at about 40 JM kids, I think 20 JM kids and 20 control kids. And the goal here is really to help us better understand if there are dietary supplements like creatine and coenzyme that have a beneficial effect on muscle strength and endurance in JM kids. I think this will be the first of some additional efforts we'll be making in the coming years to really look at more closely, I think, at alternative therapies that we might have available for our kids that will actually help build muscle strength and diminish the impact that JM has on children. Let me stop there and see if any of you have any questions.
This is Marge. Can you hear
Marge.
me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I found that very interesting, the last thing you said, because with the CoQ10, I take it for God knows what else, inflammation and heart, blah, blah, blah. But I think I told you I'm going on a drug for my asthma, which my eosinophils keep going up, which causes my flares. I think I mentioned that because when I think of these kids, they also have the eosinophils are also higher, right?
Yes.
It shows it's an interesting drug. I can talk to you further about it, but this is like a last-ditch effort for me because I'm on prednisone so much. Sounds a little familiar. Like asthma is autoimmune anyway, so that was the one. I love all your information, but my landscaper is coming and I have to run out. But on the contest, I want to know what we're going to use to get people the catchy phrase, like my friend said, "Oh, the elephants. Are we ready for the elephants?" They think
right.
That you make the money. They want to beat those elephants. So, is there a gimmick that we can use? I mean, I know the matching is great. Do you think if we got someone else to match, that would be, an impetus for people to give more? Because I don't know how else to sell it.
Yes. The bigger the match, for sure. That would definitely be helpful. But I think looking at the fact that the donors that you're reaching out to can double, and if we had an additional match, triple the impact of their dollars is important. I think the other thing that Shannon will be working on, and that will have, that I think you'll find very beneficial, is some simplified talking points. What I've been talking about here today is really more geared to all of you as parents and grandparents who want to have a very deep understanding of everything we're doing with the money that you're raising. But for people who don't have JM in their family and are doing this out of their philanthropy and the goodness of their hearts, they need a little bit of a simpler statement, which fundamentally is, at least in my mind, that statement is it wasn't that long ago that this disease was totally debilitating to more than half of the children who contracted it. Today, the outlook for most of those children is much more promising because of the progress that we've made. But we still have a long way to go before we can find a cure and before we can eliminate, not only the impact that juvenile myositis has on children around the world, but that any related autoimmune disease has on children around the world. Because one of the, to me anyway, one of the really important talking points about the success that we've had and the leadership that CureJM brings to pediatric autoimmunity, and I'm really not exaggerating this, is that we're doing more in this area to help clinicians and researchers understand how autoimmunity impacts a child's body, what those triggers are, and what the interventions can be. We're doing as much or more than any other organization, including huge organizations like the Arthritis Foundation. We're doing that because of the dedication of our parents, of our grandparents, of our friends, because of the dedication of our medical advisory board and our doctors, and because of the wisdom of our board of directors in really making what I consider to be smart decisions many years ago in terms of what we were going to focus on and the outcomes and the expectations that we were going to have. In the early years, there was a lot of emphasis on just trying to understand the disease and what is happening, and there's much more that we need to know about understanding the disease and what's happening inside the child's body. But that said, we have much more knowledge today of what successful interventions can be. Much more knowledge that there are alternative therapies, such as using biologics like rituximab off-label, such as using drugs like CellCept off-label once a child is on his or her way to remission. And as I mentioned, some of this work in coenzymes and creatine, for example, other nutraceuticals. A nutraceutical is essentially a compound that appears in nature that has natural, if you will, anti-inflammatory attributes and other impacts on the body, if you will, that could be very beneficial for juvenile myositis patients. And we've never, at this point, we haven't gone down that path, but I think that's another very promising path that now we're a larger organization and have the ability to fund more projects than we've ever had in the past is something else that we're going to want to look at. Great. A couple, just a couple of other, any other questions?
Yeah, we did get one come in on text, Jim. Do you know the estimated timing to someone getting a list of which myositis antibodies might respond to rituximab?
That paper is due out within, I'm going to walk out on a limb here a little bit and say within 30 to 60 days.
Okay. What was the question? What was the question about antibodies?
So Jim
Yeah,
mentioned, he mentioned that some children may respond to rituximab. And so this parent was wondering if if their child's antibodies were on the list or not. And so Jim's saying that we may know that later this year.
Because Madison is on that, and that's helped a lot. That got her off prednisone, my
Yes.
granddaughter.
Yes.
All right.
So,
If you guys noticed, we have a live stream joining us from the Center of Excellence at GW. So,
yeah, I see you guys. How you doing?
so everyone give a shout out to Michelle and Simonetta and Dr. Ryder and Dr. Curiel and Dr. Mamrova. We covered GW and some of the other research earlier, but we'll loop you guys in later.
Great. So just a couple of things that I also want to mention. For those of you in the Northeast in particular, but it could really be anywhere in the country, we're having a Northeast regional conference. Kind of think about this as sort of a mini conference, family conference. In the Northeast, it will be in late March of 2020. Westchester County, we don't have a location yet or an exact date, but we're pretty much looking at the last weekend in March. But to be confirmed on all of this. And it's going to be a great conference. It'll be, we'll probably have, a good 7 or 8, maybe 10 doctors and researchers presenting, for the most part from research hospitals in the Northeast and Washington, D.C. So it's a one-day conference. So the idea is for those of you in the local area, you can drive in and out with no overnights. For those of you who might be coming a little bit further, Washington D.C. to New York is about 5 hours, for example. There would only need to be one overnight. So we're really looking to keep costs low and access easy, and we'll see how this goes. If it proves to be successful, I think you can look to be seeing more regional conferences in addition to our national family conference. Moving forward, we know how important these are to our families, and so this is an effort to simply make the information that's available in our conferences more accessible to everyone. Also coming up later this month on October 27th, thank you, Michelle, very much for your willingness to help lead a webinar on school accommodations. That'll be led by Michelle Best and Sue Carpenter. These are two of our parents who have had a great amount of firsthand experience and knowledge, and sort of how to advise to assure that your child has what he or she needs to succeed in school. So these webinars for us are proving to be very popular. We're in the process of moving to doing about one a month. I think we've done about 6 in the last year, so it's more been every other month. But we're looking to do more of them because the information that's imparted is again easily accessible to parents and grandparents. And typically, quite important in terms of the knowledge that you would have for them. Any additional questions that you might have? And
Well,
Shannon,
children, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask if there's any plan on having a conference up in the Pacific Northwest, since Seattle is now one of the centers of excellence and sometimes hard to get all the way over to the East Coast.
Yeah, I think, Christy, that the likelihood would be that we would have one of these regional conferences in the Pacific Northwest. And we would look to draw families, I think, typically from the Pacific Northwest, maybe Northern California, for example, Utah, Idaho, et cetera. I'm not so sure about a national conference. The next national conference will be in February of 2021 in Houston. And then the next opportunity would be June of 2023. And that location could be a possibility. But assuming this first regional conference that we're doing in the Northeast is successful, the likelihood would be that the Pacific Northwest would be, in fact, we were thinking of the Pacific Northwest when we went to the Northeast, would be on the short list for the next regional conference.
Yeah, and just to answer a question that came in by text, all of this content that Jim is talking about, it's all at carejm.org/videos. And I can send that link out again. But every webinar, recording of, sessions from these conferences, all of that is available and really great information. The videos from last year's conference, you can skip forward to different points in them if you don't want to watch the whole 30 or 40 minutes. So let me know if you have any questions about that.
Damon, did you have a question?
Nope, I did not.
Oh, okay. Well, Shannon, anything you want to add on the technical aspects of Giving Tuesday?
Yeah, so I think we're just going to get kicked off here now. This was our official kickoff call, so thank you guys all for joining. We're working on getting the pages set up. Dave and Kathy, I do have a question for you, so I'll call you here in a second. But I think everyone else has their page set up or will shortly, so I'll reach out to you guys and we'll just be, messaging exactly, the same as last year, which is, Giving Tuesday is a big day, and this is the day to have your gift matched through the prizes that the Leitz family is offering. And as Jim alluded to, also, we're doing 2 new strategies to try to attract new families such as yourselves. We all have a different story about why we got involved, and so many families are either new to CureJM or newly involved. So we'll be offering strategies such as, for new fundraisers, $100 will be added to your page by the Leitz family. Or for people that get their page set up early, $100 will be added to their page. And where you guys, are sort of beyond that kind of strategy, for a new family, getting that first time donation is really important to them to see the difference that they're making, and then that momentum snowballs. So you'll see a lot of that kind of momentum just to attract more people behind the charge that you guys are leading. So you'll have, hopefully an army of several hundred fundraisers behind you all. So more to come.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. And again, should any of you ever have any questions, feel free to email me, james.minnow@curejm. Me anytime, 202-805-2020. Happy to chat with any of you on any detail you might have.